It looks okay over here. All right. Thank you all for your patience. I am so sorry about that. I guess my computer was tired and needed a restart, and in any case, we'll make this a little bit of an abbreviated class, but I will go over time a little bit here. So we'll do a compromise. I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I thank you all that are watching live who are hanging in. I will edit the whole half-hour intro out of this so that we can, so if you're watching this afterwards, hopefully you didn't have to witness all that. All right, let's get right into it and make sure that we're not wasting any time. So today, the 4 quadrants of the hips we've done so far: the back, buttock muscles, and hamstrings. We've done the abductors, the outer hips, and we've done the inner thighs, the adductors. Today, we're gonna be doing the hip flexors, which tend to be that hip flexors and quadriceps. One of the quadriceps is a hip flexor. It's called your rectus femoris. Your other hip flexor is called TFL, tensor fascia lata. This is one that exists more towards the outside. It is also an internal rotator as well as a hip flexor. We've got the psoas and iliacus, also part of the iliopsoas group there. So then there's also pectineus. There's all these different hip flexors that are like this incredible group that helps us bring our legs closer to our chest. Okay, and when we stretch these muscles, it's by taking the leg back behind us, typically like in the back leg of a lunge or Anjaneyasana low lunge. So let's get started. I find one quick tip. I find that, or let me say one quick note, that when the hip flexors are strong and of course mobile, it does help to keep the femur bones, the thigh bones, a little more like, let's say in hip flexion, it's easier to get into deeper hip openers like say lotus posture and such. If you have deeper hip flexion capabilities, usually the femur bone kind of sits in such a way in the hip socket that gives you more range of motion or more available movement. So strengthening your hip flexors can be really great for developing hip opening capabilities. So let's get started in all fours, hands and knees. First thing we'll do to strengthen the hip flexors, and I'll say hip flexors, of course, and also the quads, but I'm not going to say which hip flexor is which necessarily, just generally will strengthen the hip flexors group, okay? So first thing is you're going to take your right hand to your left knee, and you press your left knee into your hand. So your left knee is going to move this way, okay, while the hand pushes against that. Now, what you can try to do, so this is not going to be too much of a core exercise, you start a little arch of the back, and then you pull your knee towards your opposite armpit. Now, keeping the little arch in your back will ensure that this is hip flexors. If you start to round the back, it'll start to be a little more abdominals that you'll be using. Okay, you'll feel the hip flexors typically at the front of your hip. Okay, and then release. A little to the inside or a little to the outside will also be part of the hip flexor group. Second side, a little anterior tilt to the pelvis, the best you can, while you press your knee towards your opposite armpit. Okay, now the idea here is to activate the hip flexors and sort of move the top of the thigh bone back in the hip socket, okay? And that's gonna help us with hamstring flexibility when the hip flexors are strong. So start to move back into your downward dog preparation. And one of the hip flexors I mentioned is TFL, tensor fascia lata, and what it does is internally rotate the thighs and hip flexion. And why that's as important is because it can help you if you internally rotate your thighs, it can help you to get deeper into hip flexion, meaning help you to lengthen your hamstrings. So let's do that with your feet a little wide and your knees just in slightly. So feet wider than knees, in other words. Push your knees out. And when you push your knees out and stick your buttocks up, this is going to start to target that TFL muscle, that hip flexor, that's going to help us lengthen our hamstrings. Come up to down dog, and as you do so, think about rotating the fronts of the legs in slightly and pressing the backs of your legs apart. Okay, when you turn the fronts of the legs in and move the backs of the legs apart, it's called internal rotation, which we'll go over more in depth in another day, but the action will help us to activate our hip flexors, and that's gonna help us lift the back of the pelvis up and lengthen the hamstrings. Okay, using our strength of our hip flexors to lengthen the hamstrings. Another little trick you can do, I'm sure you've been taught this, is to start to lift your kneecaps up towards your hips and like try to suction your quadriceps up into your hip sockets. That's gonna activate rectus femoris, the other hip flexor. So I did say I was not going to necessarily specify which muscles you're activating, but I guess I'm kind of on that train, so I apologize. I'm trying to keep it simple. Not successfully simple so far. Okay, come forward to plank pose. Now in your plank pose, typically I cue you to do posterior tilt. So let's just start in posterior tilt all the way like I'm in right now. And then I'd like you to very slowly lift your bum up to the sky, just enough that you would have a gentle arch in your low back. Keeping that, now press the ball mounds of your feet down and pull them towards your hands. As you pull your feet toward your hands, you'll feel your abdominal muscles, but you'll also feel your hip flexors if you're in that little bit of an arched position in your low back. Okay, place the knees down and lower all the way to the ground. Warming up the back muscles, lift the heart. Exhale, release. 2 more, inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And release. All fours, hands and knees. Now, pause for a moment. Come forward like you're in plank on your knees, but then in order to move to all fours, you can use your hip flexors. You can pull your knees towards your elbows, and as a result, your hips will go back. Or, of course, you can push with your hands. Let's try using the hip flexors today just to kind of switch it up. Pull your knees towards your elbows. Another way you can do this is kind of stick your bum up a little bit first, then pull your knees towards your elbows, and you'll have access to your hip flexors. Come to downward facing dog. Let's take the right leg to the sky and step your right foot forward. Come high up on the fingertips. Lift the top of your back thigh bone up slightly, okay? See that? Just lift it up a little bit. Now with that, you're gonna press the ball mound of the back foot down and drag it towards the front of the yoga mat. As a result, you'll start to activate the hip flexors at the front of the left hip. Keep the hip flexors active. Get a little lighter on the fingers by getting stronger in the front buttocks and the glute muscles and hamstrings like we did last class. Your front leg, you can push your heel down and drag the front foot back, and that will get your back quadrant, the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes. That's what we did last class. But if you continue doing that while you press your ball mount of your back foot down and pull it forward, you'll start to get the hip flexors of the back leg, okay? Now, just as a little experiment, you're gonna take your fingertips out in front and pull your left knee into your chest like this, and try to touch your knee into your chest all the way, and then you can step back. Let's do 2 more. Inhale. Exhale. 1 more. Inhale. Squeeze. Exhale. Downward facing dog. Forward to plank pose. Pause. In plank pose, lift your sit bones up a little bit, slight arch in the low back, and pull your feet down into the mat and towards your hands. Okay, so as you pull your feet down into the mat and towards your hands, hip flexors start to activate. Let's take 1 more breath. And place the knees down onto the ground. All right, let's try something a little bit different. With your left, I'm just pointing my left foot here. With your left knee, press it down into the mat and pull it towards you. Your left hip, will see how my left hip kind of will hike up a little bit. Now, take your right leg up to the sky. But as your right leg goes up to the sky, instead of like last time I might have told you to press your pubic bone into the ground, I'm gonna have you pull your left knee towards your chest more until there's space here, okay? And the left hip flexors are active. So my left knee is pressing down into the yoga mat and dragging towards the front of the yoga mat, okay? And that's gonna give you leverage actually to lift the right leg up high. If you want, your forehead can be on a block, be on the ground. Hands can be wherever it feels good for you. Just trying to get the left hip flexors to activate by pressing it down and pulling it forward. There's a little knee bend on the left side too. Okay, and then release. That should be fairly tiring on the left hip flexors. Now straighten the left leg, lift it up, and press your right knee down into the mat and drag your right knee towards the front of the yoga mat. All the while, your left quads are still active. So you have a left straight leg, lifting it up. And your right knee is pressing down, pulling forward, activating the right hip flexor muscles. Keeping the right hip flexors active. Check in with your left quads, make sure they're active, straightening the left knee, and lifting the left leg up. So we're kind of training our body to pull the femur head back into the hip socket. That's the thigh bone back into the hip. That's what the hip flexors can really help us do. Come to all fours. And the thigh bone has the most congruency. That basically means like joint space on all fours like this. When we come to standing, we start running out of hip space. So in hip flexion like this, at this like 90-degree angle, we have the greatest range of motion available to us. And so that's where we want to try to get to with our pelvic tilts in all of our seated postures. Now, a lot of us, will have a rounded low back in seated postures, and that will limit our range of motion because this is moving more towards less joint space. And we want to try to get towards this hip flexed place. That gives us more available movement. Okay, downward dog. We're going to slowly walk the feet to the front of the yoga mat. And here's a great time. If you've got blocks, you can place the blocks underneath your hands. If you don't have blocks, place your fingertips out in front or place your hands on something up a little bit higher, like a chair even will work. And what you can do is with your hands here, you can start to employ your hip flexors. You can start by pulling your quadriceps up, okay? So activating your quadriceps, but like really suctioning them upward. And that should, if you watch my low back, should cause the pelvis to tilt a little bit more if you activate your quads, okay? Then what you're gonna do is try to lift your left leg up, starting with the heel. Then maybe lift the ball mount of the left foot up, and then just tap the block, okay? Then release back down. Lean into your left hip, pull your right heel up, flex the right foot, and then bring it forward, tap the block. This is your hip flexor strength. Then slowly release. If possible, try to keep an arch in the low back. That's the next level, is trying to lift your sit bones more. Requires more hamstring flexibility and greater hip flexor strength. So let's go left heel up, left foot flexes, tap, keep your bum up to the sky, and then come back and release. Right heel, right foot, butt up, tap, and release. Left, flex, tap, release. Right, flex, tap, release. Left, flex, tap, release. Right, flex, tap, release. All right, everyone, well done. Let's place the hands to the hips and rise all the way up. So if you can develop the strength of your hip flexors in that way, you're gonna find that you're gonna have greater flexibility in all your forward folds and any kind of hamstring opener. Okay, so let's bring your right knee up towards your chest with a flexed foot. Place your left hand on your knee. Soften your left knee like chair and move your hips back into an anterior tilted position. So your low back is in an arch, and even there's hip flexion at the left side. Okay, with your right knee, pull the knee up towards your opposite arm, and you should feel your right hip flexors activating just from that action, okay? Just trying to pull your knee up towards your opposite arm should get your hip flexors active. Okay, and release so we don't torture you too much, or me for that matter. Move the hips back, chair pose-like position. Bring your left knee up, flex the foot. Keep the arch in the low back, you can see there, okay? With the right hand to the left knee presses up and towards the opposite arm to activate the hip flexors. And one of those hip flexors is going to be pectineus there because you're going towards the opposite arm. Pectineus is an adductor muscle. It's a small muscle on the inner groin area. Okay, it's a great muscle to get strengthened, especially and that it's so close in towards the hips, into the groin area. You want to make sure that stays strong. Okay, and then release. It's a hip flexor and an adductor. Place the hands on the thighs, bend the knees. Move the hips back. Push the heels out isometrically. And again, when you push the heels out, it's like you're trying to, hopefully what you're getting here is not that you're moving your knees out, which would look something like this. Okay, that would be the thighs rotating out, and that would actually mean that the backs of your legs are drawing in. We want the front of the legs in, the back of the legs pushing out, the backs of your hamstrings pushing out, and as a result, you might start to get TFL, your hip flexor on the side here, to activate, tensor fascia lata. Okay, as you sit down, sit back, lift the heart, take the arms out and up. Exhale, bow forward, Uttanasana, forward fold. Halfway lift on the inhale. Step your left foot back as you exhale. Place the hands on the front thigh, come up and pause. And we're going to do the same preparation. The front heel is going to press down, and as a result, your hips lift up. And drag the front foot back a little bit. And that's your back chain of your right leg, of the front leg, right? Now let's get the front chain of the back leg. So press the ball mound of your back foot down with a straight leg, of course, so the leg is straight, quads are active, but you're pressing the ball mound down as if you're trying to push the yoga mat into the earth more. And as you try to press the yoga mat into the earth more, now drag your foot forward, your back foot towards the front of the yoga mat with your quadriceps active. So your back knee is straight. And again, you're trying to smush the yoga mat into the ground with your back foot. And then as you're kind of dragging, as if you're trying to scrunch the yoga mat underneath your feet, like you're trying to drag the back foot towards the front foot, you should feel your back hip flexors activate. Cool, all right, and hands to the ground, step to down dog. Forward to plank pose on the inhale. Exhale, lower chaturanga. Okay, right knee presses down and drags forward. Okay, as the right knee presses down and drags forward, you can lift the left leg up fairly high if you really leverage your right knee pressing down and dragging forward. Okay, then switch. Left knee, you see that? Like I can hike the left hip a little bit. I press the left knee down and drag it forward. That gives me leverage to lift the right leg up high. I'm really using my left hip flexors here. I'm pulling my knee towards my pelvis. Could even flex the knee joint if you wanted to. Get real arch in the low back. Okay, and then release. Hello, hip flexors. Okay, all fours, hands and knees. On the exhale, downward facing dog. Let's go right leg to the sky. Knee to chest, exhale, and try to actually touch your chest and then lean forward. Inhale, back and up. Of course, it's core, but it's also hip flexors. Step forward. Inhale, rise, high lunge. I'm pressing the ball mount of the back foot down and dragging it forward so the groin and hip flexor muscles here are fully active. Okay, let's hold, take a full breath in. Open up warrior two. Let's enjoy a full breath in warrior two. Reverse warrior for an inhale. Hold here for the exhale. One more inhalation. Hands to the ground as you exhale. Step forward, half lift. Exhale, bow forward. Bend the knees, chair pose. Exhale, bow to the earth. Halfway lift, inhale. Right foot steps back. All right, now gather strength in the legs, pull the feet toward each other, and let's first work on the the front leg that we were doing last practice. So what you do at the front hip is you press down using your left buttocks, press down, your hips will rise up as a result. And then you drag the front foot towards the back of the yoga mat, and that'll get the posterior chain here, the hamstrings, the back quadrant of the hips, okay? Now, for the back leg, the right leg, we find the hip flexor muscles. Place the hands on the knee and press with a straight back leg, press the ball mount of the back foot down and drag it forward. For me, it's like I imagine my back leg as a lever. I'm pressing the whole leg down, not letting the knee fall. Okay, that would lose the quadriceps. You want to keep the quads firm and move the action all the way to the hip here. The right hip presses down into the yoga mat through the foot and drag the yoga mat forward towards the front, like as if you're trying to smush the yoga mat into the earth more, trying to flatten it out and then scrunch it up towards the front of your yoga mat. Okay, that should be fairly strong. I'm getting tired just, in the position, so hopefully you are feeling that as well. All right, and then release, hands to the ground. Inhale to plank. Little anterior tilt to the pelvis, so lift your sit bones a little bit and press the feet down and drag them towards the front of the yoga mat. What I like to do is drag my feet to the opposite hand. So my left foot presses down, drags to my right. My right foot presses down, drags to my left. And then release down. All right, let's do a little cobra properly here. Fingers out to the sides. Inhale, lift the front body. Melt the chest down, relax the heart. Reach back through your toes. Lift the belly up. Exhale, release. All fours. Exhale, downward facing dog. Take the left leg to the sky. Step forward. Oh, I'm sorry, left leg backing up again. I missed the important one. Knee to chest, squeeze it into your chest, and then lean forward. Pull your knee up as high as you can. Try to touch your chest. Yeah, inhale, backing up. And now step forward. Press down into your feet. Back foot strong into the ground, pressing into the earth. Reach the arms up. Okay, so the front heel presses down, drags back. Back ball mount of the foot presses down, drags forward. Inhale, lift the heart. Open up, warrior two. Let's hang here for a full breath in. And a full breath out. Reverse warrior, inhale. Hold, exhale. One more breath in. Exhale, release, hands to the ground. Back heel pivots up, step forward, half lift.
Exhale and bow. All right, let's get back to drill number 1. Or 2 or 3, I don't know which one this was. Hands on the blocks, bend the knees, and form a tabletop position in your low back, in your whole back actually. So flatten your spine by lifting your chest and lifting your buttocks. Now, the back of your legs, the backs of your hamstrings specifically, push away from one another. So you're like trying to separate the mat with your heels, not your toes. The fronts of your thighs should wrap in a little bit. Now notice that my hips are now over my heels, not back here beyond them, right? So over your heels. Keep the backs of the legs apart. Now, this is gonna be one step more challenging. If it's too challenging, then go back a step. The first step would be you lift your right leg up, exhale, tap it to the block in front of you. Inhale, tap it to the block across from you and squeeze into the block. Exhale, back to starting position. Anterior tilt. Inhale, lift the left leg up. Tap it to the block in front of you. Inhale, tap it across. Exhale, back to starting point. Right leg up. Exhale, step or try to tap. Maybe you can go up a little bit higher now. Inhale across. Keep leaning forward. Exhale, back to starting point. Anterior tilt. Left leg up. Tap the block in front of you, or maybe all the way up to your wrist. Inhale across. Squeeze it across, across, across. Exhale, release. All right, release the block. Actually, if you've got the blocks, put them in front of you on the yoga mat in front and come to sit down. Let's continue working the hip flexors. Move your hip bones, your sit bones back, okay? And form an arch for like Dandasana. So if you look at my low back, more of an arched position. You can use your hands or your fingertips, however you'd like, but try to keep an arch in the back. Flex your feet the best you can. I think it's probably best if I do this. Okay, and then you can have your blocks on the lowest height. That's the easiest place to do this. Step 1 would be lift the left leg up, firm the quadriceps all the way. Go right up on top of the block. Okay, come up away from the block and then back to center. Now, the more challenging version of that will be instead of resting on the block, you'll come left leg up, over the block, just hover right above the ground on the left side, and then up over the block and release. Okay, so that's the more challenging version. Now, if that's accessible, then you go the next block high. So let's go the right side the same way though, so you can make choices for yourself. Right leg comes up, hovers over the block. You take a moment of rest on the block. This is level 1 essentially. And then it comes up, back to center, hover for a second, and then release the foot down. Okay. If you can, you go to the next step, which is you lift the right leg up over the block. You don't touch the ground on the right side, but you hover right above it. Okay, that'll really strengthen your hip flexors. Then you come up, over, try to hover right above the ground, and then release. Now, if level 1 and level 2 there were accessible, then you do the next height, which is going to require more power in the hips, not just longevity, but strength to be able to lift. Now, one thing is a lot of people start to bend the knees. You want to try to activate the quads the whole way. This will require us to use the hip flexors and quadriceps to create flexibility in the hamstrings. So you use the strength of your quads and hip flexors to develop flexibility. That's, I think, a great way to do it. So let me just, big difference between left and right. Yeah, I know, same. Okay, here we go. Find your anterior tilt, meaning your low back is in an arch position. You can use your hands to help that out, okay? Then let's flex the feet as much as you can. Lift your left leg up. And either you're gonna take a moment of rest or you're gonna go over, hover, up, over, hover, release. Okay, I'm gonna do the more challenging one for me, but you're welcome to take a break on the block. I want this to be appropriately challenged for you, okay? So right leg goes up, over, maybe take a moment of rest there, or you come over, you don't touch the ground on the side, come up, around, hover for a second, and then release. Left leg, inhale. Exhale as you go over, hover. Inhale, go up, over, hover, and then release. Readjust your position every time, okay? Let's do one more round. All right, cool, very cool, everyone. Now that we've gotten those little strengtheners out of the way, I'd love for you to find a towel of some sort, something that can slide on your floor. If you've got a carpet, then you might want to do like plastic plates. Those can slide on top of carpet, something that is slidable. I've got just a little towel here that will work. Bigger towel is typically easier, but you're just gonna, let's see, 1 second. Yeah, okay. What do I want to do here? Okay, I'm gonna actually show you two different things. So maybe a bigger towel, like a bath towel, would be best. Or a blanket, for that matter. Okay, so I have a bath towel that I'm gonna use. Blanket is just totally fine too if you've got a yoga blanket. And I'm gonna be going against the grain of my floor here. I mean, my floor is going this way. It's better to go with the grain, but for the sake of videoing, I'm gonna go against the grain. It makes it a little bit harder. You want your knees and feet to be fully on the towel. So you can see how I just positioned the towel accordingly. Now, really activate your fingers, grip the ground with your fingers, lean forward and round your upper back. Now we're gonna use our hip flexors to drag the mat forward and pull the knees towards the chest, then bring them back. Do a few of those, drag it forward, pull the knees to the chest, and pull it back. Now what most people do is they go forward and then they lean back like this. And so you don't get the hip flexor strength. You wanna actually lean forward and almost so much that you'd be able to lift your feet up. So there's not a lot of weight in the feet. You're using your hip flexors to pull your knees to your chest, okay? I'm sure that's gonna be tiring on your upper body as well, your forearms, so take a moment, take a break. Yeah, a little increased focus goes a long way. If you focus, you can certainly, if you take deliberate action, your body will follow. If you just sort of are aiming to go over the block, you'll kind of get maybe there, but if you really deliberately try to lift your leg up and over, it's a big difference. All right, so while you're, excuse me, something in my throat. While you're taking a moment of break, and I'm taking a sip of drink, the next one is significantly, I would say, harder on the wrist, probably a little bit easier on the core muscles, but still very challenging, a little more risky. So you'll do a very short down dog. Your fingers will grip the ground. You'll lift your heels up and you'll lean your body weight forward and drag the towel forward. drag the towel back. You see how my forearms are still vertical. It's a huge part of it. If you're not sure what vertical is for your forearms, you see this in my handstand trainings. I place blocks between or behind the forearm, and I make sure that we're not leaning back this way, but keeping it forward, right? That's gonna help us. This is not really for upper body strength, but what we're doing today, learning how to drag the legs forward and back, is you're working the hip flexors against the tension of the hamstrings and buttocks. So you don't have to do a billion rounds. I just want you to kind of work into it a little bit, because this is going to prep us to jump forward, do the hop forward a lot more gracefully, using the strength of the hip flexors against the tension of the hamstrings. And that's where a lot of people will get heavy in the legs, is because the hip flexors aren't turned on, and the hamstring tension pulls the hips down towards the ground. So while you're working on that, I'll give you a couple of rounds. You can play with it. Okay. After you've done a few rounds, I don't want you to tire out too much here. Okay, so let's go to the next thing. You can go forward but not back. Okay, so that's hamstring strength to go back. Good. It's also good for the posterior chain. The hamstrings and buttocks will push the feet back. Okay, so it just tells you, Emily, that your hamstring muscles can use some strengthening, and that will help you to push the legs back on the slides. Okay, good information to gain for yourself. So the next thing, your good old boat pose. Come to sit on you're gonna give your wrists a break for a second. Lift your chest up to sit up. Lean back and come into boat pose. Now here's what we'll do. We'll take our arms alongside the shins, and then try your best to straighten the left leg up. Keep the right knee bent. And then we'll switch. The left leg will come down. You can use your breath. Inhale, right leg up. Try to compact it in as tight as you can. Bring it down. It's okay if the back's a little rounded. Left leg. Try to bring the thighs close to your chest as you can. Exhale. Right leg. Thigh and chest as close as you can. Left leg. Thigh as close to the chest as you can. Right leg. Left leg. And release. Sit up for a moment. If you didn't feel that cramping in your hip flexors, it's because you didn't bring the thigh and chest as closely, as tight as possible, okay? Okay, yes, you focused on your hamstrings and it worked. Awesome. Love that. Where you place your attention, things happen. Okay, so we'll do this again, and I'm just gonna show you what this will lead to. If you can really compact your thighs close to your chest, instead of like the traditional boat pose, like this kind of thing, eventually you can get to a point where you're really compact and you can bring your legs completely vertical without even hands, but eventually, yes, you could use hands as well. But the tendency when people use hands, they use their arms to pull the legs, which negates all the benefits of the hip flexor strength. So instead of trying to get to this posture here, what we're gonna aim for, which is likely not to happen today, of course, because it's gonna require a lot of dedicated repetitions of building strength in this way. So let's do another round. This is the exercise that you'll work on, is you pull your knees and chest as tightly into each other as possible. I recommend flexed feet. It's gonna give you deeper stretch of the calves and hamstrings, okay? And then you just work the left quad and thigh as close to the chest as possible, okay? I'm just showing you with my hand where we wanna go. Of course, this does nothing for my strength of my hip flexors because I'm using my arm. So I try to keep it there. Okay, then switch. And you could do that. You could like use your hand to help you and then try to keep the leg there for a second as long as you can. Okay, and I'm also trying to keep the knees touching one another as I'm doing this And that ensures that I'm using my pectineus muscle, one of the hip flexors, because it's an adductor trying to squeeze the legs in. Okay, let's just do a few more. Yes, of course, your abdominals are working too. And I am rounded in the back. I'm not fully anterior tilted in that specific drill. So I do feel the abdominals working as well. But really what's getting the hip flexors to work is the thigh, chest trying to really squeeze into each other. Okay, everybody? Hope that gave you a little love and insight there. Now, let's go back to we're gonna go back to our drill here with the blocks, maybe taking it up a height now that you're aware of what the drill is. And those of you that you want to take it another step, would be to lean your hands forward like this and try to work your pelvis into more anterior tilt. Now this is extreme, so maybe not taking it up a block height and doing this, maybe just choosing one or the other. Maybe the block goes up higher, or my preference would be keep the blocks lower, but add this little element of leaning forward. So you see how my back is on an angle, it's not rounded back like this. So I'm using my anterior tilt, the front of the pelvis going down to start to activate. So we go up, over, hover, up, release. Oh, it's significantly harder. Up, over, hover, up, over, release. I readjust my posture each time to try to remind myself this is where I'm trying to be. All right, everyone, cool. Let me see what Tara has to say. When I extend the leg in the boat pose, I notice it wants to externally rotate. All right, yeah, cool. So it's probably trying to avoid, I mean, everyone kind of has that. They're trying to avoid, I think, a little bit of the hamstring stretch that happens there. And also because maybe you're using your, Tara, you're using what's called the psoas major in order to do hip flexion, which is totally fine. But if you notice that's a pattern, like that's what your body likes to do, then it's usually good to do the opposite, just because that means there's probably lack of strength in the internal rotators. And the internal rotator hip flexor is the TFL, whereas the external rotator hip flexor is going to be the psoas major, okay? So if you notice you're externally rotating when you straighten the leg, then try to internally rotate, and that will strengthen your TFL muscle, which I find is a great muscle that a lot of people are weak in. So it's a good idea to do so to bring balance in. But there's also nothing wrong with intentionally externally rotating if that was the choice. Okay, so now let's get to what I wanted to get to, like our, oh, one more thing, almost forgot, actually, come to stand up. Let's just take a moment in chair to realign the back, arc the spine, lengthen the belly. Sometimes when you work too hard in the hip flexors, it starts to flex the spine too, a little too much. Okay, so move the hips back, press the heels out, lift the arms up. Lift the chest, press it forward. Stretch the belly. All right, and then stand. All right, so today bring your left knee up, left leg out in front of you. Option to reach the arm straight up to the sky. Also option to reach forward past the toes. The other day we did a passive version, right? This is the active version. Bend the knee. And release. So it's about 5 breaths or so. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk and do that at the same time. It's a tough pose. Bring the right knee up. Arms can come up. This is going to be level 1. Stretching the leg out in front of you, finding straight using your quads. Level 2. Keeping the leg up tall, straightening the leg. Bend knee. Okay. Now, after all that intense heat building and hip flexor strengthening, now, wow, I feel like jello right now. We're gonna try to do a jump forward from down dog to Uttanasana using the strength of our legs to kind of do that toe tap into the blocks. But now you try to toe tap the backs of your wrists, and I'll, of course, show you. You could go back to dragging a towel forward, or watch me for a moment. 2 things I really do. Well, there's a number of them. First, fingers grip the ground, okay? So those are my breaks. Even though we're talking about hip flexors, you wanna make sure your foundation is strong. So I grip the fingers into the ground. The things I do in the hips, I bend my knees and I stick my bum up to the sky. If you're tighter in the hamstrings, for today, just keep your knees bent, okay, for this particular exercise, even when you jump. You take a breath in, and as you hop, you try to stick your bum back behind you, like you try to stick your butt back while keeping your feet close to your arms. Watch. Okay, so when I jump, even though, of course, you're gonna see that my low back rounds on the jump because it has to in order to keep my legs low, otherwise my legs would go high. I'm trying to arc, I'm trying to anterior tilt like chair pose. I'm trying to arc the low back, and as a result of trying to do that, what happens is my low back muscles are engaging, and that's keeping my pelvis from falling to the ground faster. And then what keeps my thighs close to my chest, which is a very important aspect because it keeps the pose light, is the hip flexors. So I'm using my low back muscles to try to pull my hips up and over, and I'm using my hip flexors to keep my thighs close into the chest, which is why I said if you've got tighter hamstrings and you try to straighten your legs, it's gonna be much harder, as you've seen in all the preparatory drills, much harder to keep the thighs in closer to the chest if you have tighter hamstrings. So while I'd like you to do that over time and using all these drills, for this posture right now, since this is like the focal point of the class, I'd like you to allow yourself now to bend your knees so that you can see if you can gain access to these 2 actions: bum back, thighs close to chest. Now, if you have more open hamstrings, more flexible hamstrings, then keep the legs straight and you can challenge yourself there. But I'll do a few more rounds so you can see. Fingers grip the ground. I find an arc in the low back. I try to keep that arc, and then I bring my thighs close to my chest as I jump. So that tap to the back of the wrist is what I'm going for. Now, there are other things at play, like if you pause the video right where I toe tapped, you'll see that my shoulders are pretty far forward without falling forward. And the way I don't fall forward is I really grip the ground with my fingers and I push the ground away like I'm just trying to, as if I'm just trying to, with all my might, raise my shoulders up to the ears. And that's what stops me from falling. I'll show a couple more rounds as you're experimenting. You can kind of intertwine with watching this demonstration. I try to anterior tilt. I try to stick my bum back behind me, and I try to bring my thighs close to my chest. And that's what creates a little bit of lightness. And I'm happy to take any questions that come up, which I'm sure there are plenty. Yeah, the low back stays arched as I try to squeeze the legs close to the chest. And now the legs will fall heavy to the ground for 2 reasons. Either I didn't lean forward or I didn't pull my hips back. You can jump, touch the wrists, but there is no float. More like bang the wrist. Well, it's a good start, Sabui. To be able to like hover the feet is It's tremendous strength of the upper body. It's a push action of your shoulders to your ears. It's a leaning action. This is something that you would get in my handstand immersion. The handstand training, which you can get on theyogimat.com/shop. So if you click the shop page, you can go to the handstand training. You get a lot of that in there. But so I don't want to focus too much on the upper body, but the lower body, the sit bones pulling back and the thighs pulling close to the chest, this is where the hip flexor muscles are going to really come into play. But, we can't deny the fact that you really need strong wrists and also the ability to lean in your hands. I'll show you again. You're going to notice that in the last part of my jump forward, if I hover, I'm going to be like really far forward here like this, okay? So the shoulders are significantly far forward, but most people don't have the strength yet in the upper body to be able to hold that. So I wouldn't even anticipate the ability to hover because that's going to just require tremendous amount of lean forward, tremendous amount of gripping, tremendous amount of pushing. That's all upper body strength, and which we're not really working on this, but I do want you to see how the hip flexors play a role in bringing even if it's just a little tap like I just did there. Oh my goodness, that's so hard for me. Going to have to work on this. Yeah, absolutely. It's not something that I would anticipate most of you are going to just nail. You'll get the hamstring. Okay, cool. You're going to get the handstand training. Wonderful. Yeah, there's two different, so just so you know, there's two different things. There's a handstand training and then there's a handstand immersion. The handstand immersion is also hips and back bends. There's it's a full practice like this one. That's also really good. But the handstand training is just dedicated to handstands. So I would do that, and that's a little bit, you'll find that not under the immersion section, but more under the workshop section. Yeah, I can't do this yet, but I feel that I have the training, handstand and now hips, and I'll make it within my reach. Yes, this is happy realization. Awesome, Kristen. Yeah, great. So, and that's good. I don't anticipate that you're all gonna just be floating in your jump forward, but to make it a little lighter, just the two actions of stick your bum back behind you and pull your thighs close to your chest, and it should make it a little lighter on you when you jump forward, okay? So now let's just go quickly. We wanna just unwind the hamstring, the hip flexors. Take your right knee back behind you, left leg in front, and today your left foot's gonna be turned out a little bit, and we're gonna do like a lizard pose, more traditional of what a lot of people will do. You can move your right leg back and then bring your elbows down. A lot of the time you'll see I do a little different of a lizard pose for everybody, and I will get to that in the next classes, but this one's good for the hip flexors, just kind of letting the hips go down. Now, one thing I do like to do is what's called a facilitated stretch on the hip flexors. I try to activate them. So what I do in this pose, like we did in those cobras, is I press the right knee down. You can watch my hips are gonna lift a little bit, and then I drag, you see that? I press the right knee down, and then I drag the right knee forward while in this position. Okay, you see it? And so I'm not just sinking, I press the right knee down and drag the right knee forward, just like we did in those earlier cobras. And some of you might feel like it's nice to then pull the heel to the bum while you do that as well. That'll stretch the quads and strengthen the hamstrings. Always fun to add little things in, but it may not be accessible. All right, let's release. And we'll switch the sides. All right, so we take a nice long stance. Tuck the back toes. Take a few moments of a passive stretch as you wish. All right, and then you push to add the facilitated stretch, press your left knee down into the ground and drag it forward to activate the hip flexors. And just optionally, you can pull your heel towards your bum to activate the hamstrings. let's switch the sides. Come back to the first side. And we do one of my favorite thigh stretches, hip flexor stretches called twisted monkey. Same setup, left foot is outside of left hand. The right hand's gonna come to the right. And curl back and reach for your back foot with your hand. Just like so. And once you grab the back foot, or you can have a strap if you can't reach the foot, you're gonna try to apply the same actions. You press your back knee down and drag it forward just like you did in the last pose and also in that first cobra pose, trying to activate your hip flexors. But if you wanna add one more step on here, you can press your foot gently back into your arm, your hand, your strap, activating the quadriceps. It's gonna be nice to unwind them. All right, release the foot. We're gonna switch sides, twisted monkey on the other side. Again, on this side now, if you want to activate your hip flexors, you press the knee down and you draw it towards the front foot. It doesn't stop you from stretching. That's one thing that some people think, oh, like I'm not feeling the stretch as much. It's not that you're not stretching as much. It's actually, you are stretching pretty much equally, but you're just adding the sensational experience of muscle activation, which takes away the stretch sensation, because now the stretch sensation is the body trying to scream at you saying, hey, be careful. When you activate a muscle, your body recognizes that you're participating and you are aware, and so it releases the stretch sensation. Doesn't mean the muscle is any shorter than it was. So, it's sometimes we associate stretching with that sensation. It's not exactly true that the sensation means that you're stretching. It just means that your body's giving you a warning sign that this is dangerous. And stretching is dangerous, so you do want to adhere to that warning sign by starting to be attentive to what's going on, not checking out when you develop flexibility. Okay, and release. One more. You take your left foot forward. This time with your left foot in between your hands, a little more traditionally here. Take your hands up to your thigh, move your hips forward. Same action, press your back knee down and drag it forward. Your hips will lift a little bit, and then now you can bend your right knee. Should be able to see it from this angle, I think. Nope, still can't get it. Okay, maybe we'll go here. You can bend your right knee, and with the same hand and same foot, reach backwards. And then you try to turn your chest back to center once you've got your foot or your strap. And a couple of things you can do is, same idea, press your right knee down and drag it forward the same way that you were doing earlier. So you actually tire out your hip flexors while you're doing something like this. And as a result, they're gonna really have a deep opening of both stretching and strengthening them. You're gonna find much more effective than if you just passively stretch. Okay, let's release that thigh stretch on that side. Last one here. Just, you guys can lunge forward. In this pose, my shins and my feet of the back leg always start to cramp, and my knee on the mat hurts. What can you do against this? Oh, first, you can just roll over the mat for more cushioning, okay? Your shin and feet to the back leg always start to cramp. Okay, so you're gonna actually flex the foot instead. That will take the cramp out. Otherwise, the pointed foot is gonna cramp the foot for sure. So just flex the foot, or if you're pointing the foot, flex your toes back, like floint your toes. That will also take some of the cramping away out of the sole of the foot and maybe even into the calf. So you can just flex, you can pull the heel in, you can grab the shin, however you want to grab it. You can just flex the foot, it'll be a lot easier for you. Typically I point because it gives you a little bit more length in the front body, in the front of the shin and the front of the quads. And that is significantly more challenging, I would say. But yeah, if you flick your toes back, any sort of activation of the front chain is going to help. So pulling the back knee forward, kicking the foot back, flick the toes into your hand. Okay, that works better. Great. All right, everyone. Last little posture before we Shavasana. You can just take a block underneath your hips, and we're take. This is called hero's pose. Now, for some of you, this is going to be really easy with a block underneath. Some of you, it's a little. If it's too easy, then you take the block away and you sit. This is very internally rotated pose. The thighs are turned in, okay? Most of you, that's going to be just enough. Some of you can take your hands back behind you, maybe on blocks perhaps. You can take your forearms to the blocks. Some of you, that's also fairly easy. If so, you can start to lay back. It's okay if you have a little arch in your back. So now this is Virasana. If you want, you could work a little into a tucked tailbone, and that will increase the stretch of the rectus femoris, one of the quadriceps there. But make sure you have enough space in your low back. So I'm lengthening my abdomen significantly. I'm letting it go long so I don't compress my spine. Reclined hero's pose. Supta Virasana. Most of you, this is just a little extreme, so it's totally unnecessary. Just better to sit up, not to put this kind of not trying to adapt to this extreme position. So to come up, usually I do like a little dolphin experience with my elbows. There's all sorts of ways you can do that. All right. Yeah, so in the jump forward, it's an exhale. It's either an exhale or at the end of an exhale when you jump. My knees always want to go wide and reclined. Is that wrong? Well, it's not wrong, Annie. It's the reason they want to go wide is like, because this is a lot of internal rotation. So your legs are trying to like find a way out of it. I think it's good to keep the internal rotation, and like they don't have to go too wide, but I'd say like hip width apart is just fine. Even better, I think what might be helpful is keep them in, but then isometrically push them out. I think the internal rotation is a good thing though, and not letting them go too much into abduction too far apart. I think that's one of the benefits of this pose is that it's internally rotated and it's also adducted in, it's squeezed in a little, and that's going to strengthen your inner thighs there. All right. Let's come to Shavasana all. So what I do, and especially after that one, is I do an internally rotated pose. It's like Virasana on the back, to very less extreme. We'll do a brief Shavasana since we are significantly over time with the technical delays, but I'd love for you to, if you have the time, just press pause on the video. This is a great time to really take a deep 10-minute Shavasana, maybe even longer. And it's okay if you doze off a little bit, even if it's a little nap time, that's totally fine after the challenging practice of the hip flexors. Bring your awareness back to your breath. And the sensations of your body. With deeper breaths, begin to bring some movement into your hands, your wrists, ankles, shoulders. Roll to your side and make your way up to a seated position. We place our hands in front of the heart. Bow in with gratitude. Thank you, everybody, for your efforts today, for your practice. Thank you to our hip flexors for all that they do for us on a daily basis. Happy to give back by paying attention to them. We bow in to this body and everyone in this community. Namaste, everybody. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure to share with you. Just make sure there's no more questions. Thank you. I'll just take a check in the chat and everything. Some of you had to go early. That's no big deal at all. So bye Kristen, bye Anine, bye Ani. Simona says, what an amazing class. One of my favorites, super challenging, but so good. Thank you. Awesome, Simona. I'm super happy to hear that. Sabui says, amazing. Thank you so much. I have a good hip flexion, but never has twisted monkey. Felt so good after a fabulous strengthening hip flexor class. Grateful for you teaching us. See you Saturday. Awesome. Thank you, Sabui. Looking forward to it. Debbie says, as always, awesome. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for being here. Ani, lovely class, he says. Thanks so much. Thank you, Ani. Tara says, thank you so much, Matt. Lots of great tips to help strengthen my TFL. Huge weakness for me. Awesome. Happy to hear you've got some stuff to work on, Tara. Emily says, thank you, Matt. Don't know if I'm going to make it on Saturday live. The rest of the classes, I'm going to check within a month. I'm going to volunteer at an ashram. Awesome, Emily. Enjoy your time there. Hope it goes well. Nina G says, thank you so much. It was amazing. Awesome. Thank you, Nina. All right, all. Oh, hey, Betty. Betty says, really wonderful class today. Thank you so much. Thanks for all the spirit in here. Yeah. Thank you, Petty. Nice to have you involved in this. Nina Eckhart says, thank you, Matt. Great class. I'm slowly getting better at jumping forward. It's a long process, indeed. Thank you, Nina. Okay, friends, have a beautiful day. Take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.